Hello, my name is Mark Aziz, and I will be talking about the genetics and the evolution of type 1 diabetes. What is type 1 diabetes? Type 1 diabetes is also known as T1D. It's an autoimmune disease that leads to the destruction of pancreatic beta cells. Pancreatic beta cells are involved in producing insulin, which is necessary for the regulation. It's a hormone that's necessary for the regulation of blood sugar levels. And basically, uh, diabetic patients or patients with type 1 diabetes, they lack these beta cells, which makes them unable to produce insulin. And no insulin means no regulation of blood sugar, which is very, very dangerous. And it's linked to many, many diseases such as diabetic neuropathy, which is a disease in the nerves where a person loses complete sensation of things like pain and stuff like that, which is very, very dangerous, especially in their feet. It leads to other diseases such as chronic kidney diseases and also many different heart diseases. The difficulty of studying type 1 diabetes. The main difficulty of studying type 1 diabetes and understanding it is that both the genetics and the environment come into play. It's simply not just a genetic disease, but it's a disease that is very, very sort of intertwined and linked with the specific environment of a population or a person or an individual. And also, genetic drift and globalization has made it slightly more difficult to track type 1 diabetes. Um, and yeah, as I said, genetic risk of type 1 diabetes includes ancestry specific disease associated variants, meaning that there are different variants, different populations are have different associations with different variants and different alleles uh, and type 1 diabetes. And a proof that it's not just the genetics, but it's also an environment is that there are many, many cases where you have identical twins, where one of the identical twins doesn't have T1D, which means that it's not just the genetics, but there are other environmental factors that we will dive into to sort of explain or see if there's any correlations. And also, it's important to note that this is a very, very highly debated topic. So there's a lot of conflicting research. Scientists have done many, many different research and studies in different countries, different populations, and there is a lot of conflicting research. So this is where sometimes the difficulty can come into play. For this presentation, I've used four different articles. I've used type 1 diabetes in diverse ancestries and the use of genetic risk scores, environmental risk factors for type 1 diabetes, identical and non-identical twins, risk and factors involved in development of isolated autoimmunity and type 1 diseases, and the sweet thing about type 1 diabetes, cryoprotective evolutionary adaptation, which was a publication by the NIH. Discrepancy and variation between T1D and different populations. So, actually, white Americans have the highest rate of type 1 diabetes. They have it 1.5 times more than Black and Hispanic populations, 4 times more than Asian populations, and 9 times more than American Indian populations. The prevalence of type 1 diabetes in white populations is 4 out of 1,000, and it's actually much, much higher in the country of Finland, which is located in Northern Europe. And the geography is very, very important for this topic because I'll explain later, there are some factors that could explain this higher rate in Finland specifically. And also, there's an African specific haplotype, the HLA-DQA1 star 0301, whereas there's another European specific haplotype, HLA-DRB 1 star 0301, which shows that there are different variations, there are different genes, alleles that are associated with type 1 diabetes, and it sort of depends on the population. It depends on where you are environmentally as well. Environmental factors associated with T1D. So, animal models and human studies have shown that there is an association between type 1 diabetes and enteroviral infection in the pancreas. It is said that these viruses, these enteroviruses, have a tropism to human pancreatic islets, which are basically just small clusters that contain hormone producing cells, such as beta cells, which ultimately produce insulin. So it says that these enteroviruses sort of promote or sort of further activate human pancreatic islets, which are small clusters that contain the hormone producing cells such as beta cells and insulin. Also, there is an association with breastfeeding. Research does show that breastfeeding actually has shown uh, that it can potentially protect against type 1 diabetes as sort of a protective measure against type 1 diabetes. And thirdly, vitamin D. There have been two meta analysis of retrospective studies that have shown that type 1 diabetes in infants who are supplemented with vitamin D, uh, the risk of type 1 diabetes in infants who are supplemented with vitamin D actually goes down. And it's said that this is mainly because vitamin D has an active role in regulation of the immune system. So it's said that it could potentially work to protect against type 1 diabetes. Also, another reason for this sort of hypothesis of vitamin D helping to defend against type 1 diabetes is because there has been a study in Belgium where it shows that the hours of sunshine are inversely related with new patients diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which basically means that when there's a lot of sun, when the sun's out in Belgium, there are less new type 1 diabetes patients, whereas when there is less sun in Belgium, there's more type 1 diabetes patients, new type 1 diabetes patients. Uh, an important thing that we have discussed in class, which is the hygiene hypothesis, is actually not supported when it comes to the specific disease of type 1 diabetes. Research shows that the hygiene hypothesis does not necessarily apply to type 1 diabetes, and this was shown in UK population studies, which showed an increase in early respiratory infections actually increases the risk of isolate autoimmunity. So when a person is infected with a respiratory infection at a young age, it actually increases his risk of type 1 diabetes as opposed to decrease, as we would know the hygiene hypothesis. This was actually also backed by a study in Norway. There's also been the DAISY study in Colorado, which actually shows that uh, increase in gastrointestinal infections, increase in the gastrointestinal infections actually also increases isolated autoimmunity. So we see that when a person is infected at a young age with a respiratory infection or a gastrointestinal infection, that it actually increases the risk of type 1 diabetes as opposed to decreasing, as we would know, uh, said by the hygiene hypothesis. So it's actually not supported in the case of type 1 diabetes. The presence of type 1 diabetes today. So there have been many hypotheses which indicate that T1D started in Northern Europe as a defense mechanism against the cold. So this could be the reason why type 1 diabetes first came into play and was actually a beneficial sort of mutation. High concentrations of substances such as glucose depress the freezing point of the body fluids and prevent the formation of ice crystals in cells through supercooling. So, during just before the ice age, when it was really, really cold, actually having high blood glucose levels can defend against the cold and stop people from sort of freezing to death. So this could explain why, uh, as we talked earlier, that white Americans have a higher rate in T1D, and also especially the population in Finland is much more susceptible to type 1 diabetes or has a higher rate of type 1 diabetes than other populations. And it could be explained by this sort of origin of type 1 diabetes that started as a defense mechanism against the cold in these colder regions. However, the reason why type 1 diabetes, obviously this we know this can present many, many challenges because nowadays obviously, we have sort of shelter, fire, clothes, warmer clothes. So now we see that uh, instead of reaping the benefits of type 1 diabetes, we have now it's been a disease that has caused many, many different health complications such as we discussed, neuropathy, health diseases, kidney diseases, etc., etc. And the reason why type 1 diabetes has been, successful sort of lingering on and hasn't been sort of selected out of the population is because people with type 1 diabetes live to the reproductive age and pass on the genes. Actually, studies do show that there is no difference in the life expectancy of a person with type 1 diabetes and the person without. So it says that the average life expectancy of a person with type 1 diabetes is like 74 years old. So it's very, very similar. So obviously they live and they're able to pass on their genes, and type 1 diabetes can be passed through inheritance. It's said that a man with type 1 diabetes has a 1 over 17 chance of passing on the type 1 diabetes to his offsprings, whereas a woman has a 1 in 25 chance of passing her type 1 diabetes to her offspring. So it's a little more than just, an average random mutation and environmental factor that causes type 1 diabetes, which allows this disease to sort of linger on to today's population. Unfortunately, with the disease, there's also no cure for it as of right now. There's just treatments such as insulin injections to sort of insert this insulin to balance and regulate the blood sugar levels. And that's all that I have for today.